another class down. We did have 2 chapters. Both 15 was probably the one that you cared more about. 16, we've done enums, I think, in JavaScript, so that shouldn't have been brand new. It's just Java does do stuff that's slightly different, a little bit more powerful. So we'll go over that. So with this validation, there is a key concept that you have to think about as a software developer. We want the data that's coming into our system as good as possible. So if you heard the phrase like bad data in, bad data out type of mentality, if we collect bad data, no matter what we try to do, it's going to be bad data. So there's no way to kind of get around that. So there's 2 reasons why you want to do client-side validation and server-side validation. For you guys right now, you definitely want to validate everything so that you have only good data. That should be your primary focus right now. On the other hand, the second level of that is actually security. So if you're enforcing rules, validation rules, not only are you enforcing what kind of data can come in, but you're also saying what data cannot come in, so people can't put in things that could be potentially harmful to your web application. So there's the validation on the just data, but then there's also security. When you talk about client side, that's the stuff that's running in the browser, meaning if it runs before any information gets sent back, then that's client side. If that's written in HTML and JavaScript, then it's on the client side. It's usually done in the browser. Server side is on the back end, so they're going to send a request into Java, in our case, and then the Java is going to do the validation. So most of the stuff that we are doing right now in this chapter is server-side validation. There is one place that I think that they have client-side validation, and I'll show you that. There's a bunch more annotations you got to memorize or know how to Google. Most of those I think should make sense. It is standard practice that anytime you do validation to have a message. I'm telling right now, I'm working on a system that whenever a user logs in, it gives them no message back, which that means it gives me as a developer no message, which means that it takes me twice as long to hunt down things. So please always think about sending a message back to the user if it's something that they can handle. And if it's not something that they can handle, when you're writing your bigger project, make sure that you're logging that somewhere so that whenever you go back to your logs, you can see, oh, this is the reason why. So always having when something does not work, you need to record it somewhere. Either users back to the user if they need to fix something, or on the server through logging if it's something that you need to deal with. And then the way that Timely deals with this validation is this @valid. To be honest, I've never used the @valid annotation in my professional career. We do validation, but it's a bunch of like if statements. So if there's certain things that we need, we ingest the JSON object. We can map that JSON object to an object pretty quick, and then I validate certain things that I have to have before I even get started. And if not, I send back a message to say, hey, I need these other things. So the @valid is slightly different, but the concept is exactly the same. So even if you don't have to memorize the @valid annotations and how we're doing this technically, but you do need to understand it conceptually. And then using errors as objects. This is a common thing to like wrap all of your error stuff together before sending it back or displaying it for the user. It makes it easier whenever you're handling errors because they always look the same. They're in the same structure. And then there's the TH field. To be honest, it's on the thing. We'll talk about that. Enums. So I've realized that I've used enums quite a bit in Java, but in JavaScript, I know we talked about them, but if you really look up enums in JavaScript, I think there's a growing community that says that you should not use enums in JavaScript. And you can look up why that is. It's mainly with TypeScript. It has some overhead performance that also, remember, JavaScript, you can create whatever object type you want. So I think they're saying don't use the enum keyword. You just create an object that has those kind of constant values in there, and then use that as an actual object rather than an enum object. So those of you that are wanting to work on the front end, you might search why not to use enums in TypeScript. But in Java, though, we use it all the time. You guys have already used it a couple times, or if you haven't, we will be using that here really, really soon. Now, most of the enums that we will deal with, we are not going to create. You're just going to use built-in ones. But it definitely helps you solidify certain properties. If you want to use a get command, well, is get lowercase? Is it uppercase? Is it, how does it, whatever? If you set an enum, then it always knows, and you don't have to worry about case. It just works. So enums structure certain things. I think it talks about like days of the week, those kind of things. It just helps you not have it in multiple different ways. Some of the key takeaways, enumeration is technically the vocabulary, but nobody ever says that. They just say enum. Whenever they were using enums, one example that they used for using them was being able to put it into a drop-down menu, which, remember, drop-down menus are your select tags. So that's the name that, that's the tag name for a drop-down menu. And then they said log level. I never used the log level as an enum. I use the logger dot debug or the logger dot error or the log level as a method in built-in Java logging. So I've never used it as an enum, but they said it there, so I put it on the thing. Here were some codes to kind of visually walk through. So remember, for it to be an enum, you have to declare it as an enum. What this does is it solidifies all of this stuff as almost like constants. So if you do Sunday, then it knows that it's Sunday and false. If you do Monday, also enums, if you've noticed, they're all capitalized. That's a common case thing. You always want to capitalize the enums because they are constants. You get to pick which one, but once, like, the actual stuff inside of it doesn't change. So if I select Sunday, Sunday has to be there. It's never going to be Monday. If it's Monday, then I'll select the enum of Monday. So these things won't change. You can also do other actions. So whenever you create the day, this is actually creating an object with a name and a Boolean of is it a weekday? This is more, usually when I'm doing enums, it's just this top part. There's usually not a lot of manipulating, but you can. These are all possibilities. And then how do you do that or display? I know these are days and these are events, but they have the code for that select. So remember, this select is a key reason why you want to use enums, because the select limits your options. And then once you select it, then you have them there. So it's a good reason to use it. Again, I only got one question that I really picked off. Is there any way to use model binding and validation to edit our objects? And so Trevor did do a good call out. Whenever you're doing the at model attribute, so it's like when it's actually binding the model, it's going to call the constructor that it needs. which oftentimes is that empty constructor, and then it uses the set methods to actually set them. So then, how do you want to handle that? Should you handle that? So whenever you talk about edit your objects, you could put in your setters that if you see this, to actually change it to this, this other thing. You could mess with that, but usually with validation, it is just a yes or no. Is it valid or is it not? And if it's not valid, return a message back. So I don't usually see a validation to actually edit the objects. Graded assignment 2, just to keep you up to date on where you should be. This should be done code-wise. If you still need to get it checked off through your IA, definitely do that before Thursday. But this thing should be done because you really need to start working on assignment 3. The good news is about assignment 3, it gives you your test, like it gives you a sample website to look at for what it should be at the very end. So use that to your advantage. I'm not probably going to go over assignment 3 unless there's specific questions about it today. But definitely check out that demo site that I showed off last time. That's how you're going to get started on assignment 3 to make sure you know how it works. Let's go into a little bit of code, and then I'll talk about next class. So they did coding events. Let me make this bigger for you. Right. So the only thing I really changed, remember when you go to Git, you can change the different branches down here. And so they told us to go to this display errors branch. So that's the one that I just right-clicked and I said check out. And then I edited that one. How I edited it, now this is what they did in the actual lesson. So I just want to make sure that we go over the validation. There's 2 things you got to do. The first thing is just go to the actual object that you want to make sure you have validations for, and then you're just going to put in whatever annotations is needed, and then fill in the variables with that, making sure that you always have a message. So always have a message. And then remember with not blank, that's pretty obvious. With size, you can set a min or max, or you can just set min or max. I think there was a random question on, well, on this one, could I just do at max? You absolutely can. It does not matter. It's personal preference. I don't see a pro nor con about either one. I mean, somebody that uses size here might use size here just to keep it all consistent. But I can see arguments for either one. So as long as it makes sense and it's easy to read, then I'm good with it. Not blank is easy. Email. We'll look at this in a second just so that you can see front end versus back end, or client side versus server side validation. Not blank again. Assert true. So these are ones where this needs to be true or else it will not create this. So this is part of the exercise part. You're supposed to add a location that's just a string, and then you're supposed to add a registration required Boolean, and then a number of attendees, so an integer. And this is where they were talking about you could, I think originally this wasn't here, but if this isn't here, it kind of messes with the ID. So you need to ensure that the ID is here, and then you can actually set the name, the description, and the contact email later. So that's how that app model works. The only other thing that they did show, so I wanted to make sure that was kind of pointed out, this app positive, you could do this on the Git, but you could do it up here. That's why this one doesn't have a validation thing. It's just another way of doing certain things, but you could do like I can't remember it off the top of my head. but you could validate it right here as well. Just different ways to do it. And then I think that was mainly it for there. These are just normal setters and getters. So once you set up the annotations, the only thing that you have to do is on your actual controller. I thought I had it up. On your actual controller, you say model attribute. So this is the event that I want to create. And I just put the @valid and squeeze it right in between all of that stuff. This thing here looks for these things here. So that's all you have to do on the controller is put that, and then it checks. Now, when you do this @valid, you have to also include this errors object. This errors object is just like the models object. It's built into Spring and Timely. This comes from your validation, your Spring Framework validation class. So this is built into Spring. It's going to naturally produce errors if there are any, and this is where it's going to get thrown in there. So then when you do the does it have errors, and if it does, you're just going to return this thing back again. So remember, this is the create. So you're going to return the events create. If there are no errors, you're going to add the new event and redirect them. I think that was the only addition on that thing. Yeah. So again, Spring is doing some magic behind the scenes. This validation stuff it's looking for. Here it's checking it. So let's run this and see what happens. So again, I'm doing localhost 8080. Pull this off to the side here. So it's loading my local host. It's loading that Bootstrap stuff. When I do create event, it calls the create. So it's saying invalid email, try again. Registration must be required at this time. So these are all those messages that we had in this event. So registration must be required at this time. Registration must be required at this time. So all of these are getting, you're sending it to this create. It's a post request. So you're actually sending it to the events dash create, and it's saying, hey, you can't do that. So let's do this. So it allowed me to do this, and it returned back. It's required. It's working. I mean, mine is still here, so I don't understand the question. The drop down is part of the enum, so I'm going to show that planet thing with the drop down. The code here is the I can't always remember what they give you and what I just kind of steal and or make up on the side. On the create HTML, registration required, I said checkbox. And then number of attendees. If you do type number, it'll just let you do numbers. I thought this one was already like this. Okay, so type. I wanted to show you, I think this should work. I think email is a type, yes. Fine. So on the contact email, I'm gonna actually add this type email right here. Since I am putting it in HTML, let's rerun this and see what happens. I'm gonna. Okay. So when I'm creating this event and I do this, if you notice, it only complains about my email. And if you noticed over here, I'll do it again. When I hit create, do you see how there's no network traffic at all whenever I'm doing this? That is because this error is getting handled on the client side. It's getting handled on the browser. That's how I can tell if it's the browser. I also know it's the browser because I put it into this type email. I put it inside HTML. And remember, HTML and JavaScript, that is on the client machine. The stuff in the controller is on the back end. This is on the server side. So this is what we're talking about. This is a perfect example of client-side validation. This is client-side. It's not even allowing me to post this. So then once I send an email, it allows it to send, but then on the server side, I'm having more errors. So hopefully that clears up at least a little bit. There is client-side and server-side validation going on here. On the email, I was able to show that by doing this type email, and this thing here is validating that it's a valid email. So I'm going to pause just for a second because I'm just going to, I don't think there's anything else left for this. But I'd love to answer any questions that people have about this validation stuff. I won't close all the way out of it, but I am going to close, I'm going to shut it down. So this local host is going to go away because I'm going to stop this. So that's why this is kind of short, in my opinion. The lecture is a little shorter because it's one of those things. I think it makes a lot of sense on validation. We talked about how to validate, why you should validate, and then you just follow the examples to validate. So yeah, if you have any questions, let me know. But I think it's pretty straightforward on this one. And Enums is going to be the same thing on the concept. But as many of you pointed out, I think that the actual running of this, even I was not able to get this to run very well. So what I did, I went to Spring Initializer. I just created another enumerable planets application. I brought in Spring Web and I brought in Timeleaf. And then all I did was I made new packages. And I created the controllers and the models package. And then I took my planets controller and my planets and copied and pasted them and plotted them there. And then I brought in the details and the index. So I only created 4 files here. And I just copied them over. And then once I did, everything ran perfectly. So I don't know what was going on. Because I had some weird issues. It wasn't even that I knew what the issues were. I re-indexed things, and half my annotations turned red afterwards. So I was getting some really weird stuff. Anytime I get something weird, I just restart and copy and paste code. So I'll go over what I did. First of all, on the planets, I stole this from somewhere. I don't know if they actually gave you those numbers or not, but the year length and the name, and here's the actual name of the enums of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 You can tell the age of the person that made it based on if there's 8 planets or 9. Because when I was at school, there was 9 planets. So anyway, they created name, yearling. Yeah, just the basic structure here. It looks very similar to the weekdays and everything else. So hopefully this is pretty straightforward. Now, how did we actually handle it? So the first thing that I did, and mine's a little different than probably the book, but this one's the same. Display index. Anytime they go to my service, it's going to display the index. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in all the values. So planets.values, it just grabs all the planets. And since it's an enum, just planets.value. I don't know if you could read that, but it says public enums planets. So it knows what it is. It grabs all the values. It throws it in to the index. So if we want to look at the index real quick, this is just your basic header stuff. The H1 says pick a planet. Now, I did 2 different things. I think that it started off with this like listing elements. So it's for each planet and planets, set the text to be the planet. I think they gave you this one, but I wanted to do a drop down to match what they did in the lesson. So I created this. I created a form with an action that would go to planet. And I did a get. I could have done a post. I don't really care. But I made a select tag with the planet. That's the name that whenever they select it, that's the variable name that it's going to get set to. And then the option is this for each planet and planets, have the value be the planet and the text be the planet.name. And then I made a submit button for my form so that it would go to this /planets. So if I go back to my controller, my /planet is right here. So whenever I actually hit the submit form, it's going to go to this thing. And again, I could have done get map or post mapping if I wanted to. And then I am sending it in a planet as a string. And then to look up the actual planet that I'm looking up, I'm going to do this planets value of and select this whatever planet I put in, like Pluto, but Pluto's not a planet, I guess. And then I'm going to add that as an attribute of one planet, not an S, like up here, planets. Is all of them planet 1, and I'm going to return details. Now, the problem is if I typed in Pluto, let's say that I didn't select one of the things and I just typed in Pluto, it would try to look up Pluto. It'd say it's not a planet, and this would mess up. And so if it does that, it's just going to redirect back to the slash and the slash, remember, is the get mapping with nothing. So it's just going to take me back to the index. So Bird, I'm going to try to answer that question when I'm done with this train of thought. I do like your question. So hopefully that makes sense on this. And then the details, all I did was I said, you picked planet whatever, your planet name and your planet yearling. I'm just displaying information so that you can see that it's actually grabbing it from the planet object. So let's try this thing and see how it runs. So when I go back to 8080, so this is the pick a planet, and here's my drop down, my select. And again, I listed them off in lists just because that was the first step. Now that I have a drop down, I can probably delete this side, but I just kept it there because it was part of my iteration process. And so if I pick Saturn and I hit the submit, you'll see that it goes to planet with a parameter of Saturn, and it'll tell me that I picked Saturn, and it'll give me my stuff there. I did not do a back button, but let's just go back. And so if I select Neptune It'll say I picked Neptune with this. And this is the URL. I mean, you can see the URL up here as well, but you can see in the network tab what it's really doing right here. So, so the question, why do both get and post work? Okay, so whenever they'll call these REST. Do I even know why they're called REST? So we are dealing with what we call a REST API, which is, I guess, a representational state transfer. This is a guideline to manage communication. That's all it's talking about. So get, post, patch, delete, all of these are these are message types that everybody has agreed that if you are using a REST API, if you are using the REST guideline, these are the only, like, I don't even know, 7, here's all the different methods. Why does it keep resetting? These are the different methods that you can use. Come on. So these are the different methods you can use. You can use get, you can use post, put, which is like an update, and then delete. So those are your 4 main ones. This is it's the same as like the CRUD operations. They just call them different. So get is your read, post is usually your create, put is an update, and delete is delete. That was the original intention, but now you can do whatever you want to as long as it's agreed upon. So if in my server on my controller, if I instead say, hey, if you want to get the planet, I'm going to make you do post. All that means is when I'm designing my API, that I'm saying, if you want this, you got to use post. So that means that my index here, instead of the method here, I would say post. And I'm hoping this will work in front of me. I did not try this ahead of time. So if I do Venus, it'll work Venus. Here's the interesting part about the difference between post and get. If I go up here, and you saw before, if I did the planet equals Venus, like I did before, it's going to error out. That is because your browser only by itself, when I type in a URL and I hit enter, the only method type it can do is a get. It's the only one. For me to do a post, I have to use like a form and say, hey, use post. So get and post are the 2 most common. I could do a put or a delete in a form. But the reason why you usually, if you want this information easily accessible, you use a get. If you're changing information, you use a post. That's by just rules, guidelines, not even rules, guidelines. You saw it say guidelines. So it's a handshake. It's a communication between your front end and back end. That's really what's going on there. If I don't want somebody, if I wanted it so that the only people that can actually see the stuff behind these, if the only way I want them to see that is if they click this drop down and that's the only way, then I'm going to make it a post, because they can't magically type something into the end of the URL and get to it ever. They have to submit a form to do it. Now, they could technically create their own form that their action goes to that URL with a post, but that's a lot of work. So hopefully that explains the get a little bit, but it's talking about this request method. Can I do it? It's not a patch, it's a put. I have no clue if this will work. You guys got me thinking. Yeah, I have no clue. I think it's put. I haven't messed with, I only do get and post all the time. I'm not used to the other ones, so I bet you somebody here could Google it. Anyway. But every API has its own kind of way of doing things. Because my current service makes calls to Salesforce, and I have to use patch here quite a bit. So it's just a different ways of doing it. Any other questions on Enums? Again, the big thing is if you want to structure where there's only 8 things, however many things that you want, and they have attributes that you can set ahead of time and will never change. That is when you use enums. Enums do not change. The other call out that I do want to say, if you have constant static just strings, meaning if this was just Mercury and it was not Mercury with an 88, the best thing to do there is to then just create a public static final string. This is a bad place for it. I don't even know. As you can tell, it does not like that it's in an enum, because you can't do these in enums. Let's go over to, there you go. So if I want planet Pluto to always equal Pluto every single time, you can also do this instead. If it's like a singleton, if it's a, just something like you're going to use Pluto everywhere, you're going to create it static so that you can call it from any other place. But then if I'm going to do this, I'm also going to do, it's going to be all capital. So you'll sometimes see these done instead of enums. The cool thing about this enum is, since it has multiple ones, they're kind of categorized together. That's when you would use enums. If you're just going to do a single or maybe even 2 things that don't really relate a huge amount to each other, you can also do this. And this you can also access anywhere too. So just throwing that out there. And yep. I'm going to talk about Studio, and then I'll talk about setup for next week, or setup for the next couple days. Right. The Studio. So whenever you go to your spa day application, it says check out the user sign up part 2 branch. So when you go to spa day and you go to get, there should be 3 branches. The starter a sign up starter, and then a sign up part 2. This is the one that you want to check out. If you can see here, I'm already checked out the part 2. So this is your starting place. This has everything from last studio working in it. This works. So if I hit run right now, and I go to localhost, it'll ask me for the skin type, pedicure, manicure, whichever one. This is what it has, and then it gives me this information. And then if you remember last time you were supposed to do a user, and I think it's at the user/add for you to add a user that has an username, email, password, and verify password. Something that wasn't explicitly said very well, in my opinion. Your username, email, and password are all linked to that user object, but your verify password is just it's going to try to match your password with your verify password. So in your controller, it's going to ask, is the user.getPassword equal to that verify string that also comes in? So the user has a user email, a user username, and a user password. So this user brings in their username, email, and password, and then you're going to ask, is the password equal to the verify? And you could set this up either way. So you could do verify.equals and then put user.getPassword inside the equals. Either way works. And if they do, you're going to send them to the index. And if there's an error, you're going to say, hey, passwords don't match. And then you're going to keep them on that user add page. So hopefully that makes a little sense from last time. What you guys are going to do during Studio is you're just going to do all that add validation annotations. So you're going to go to the user and you're just going to start doing the at not blank, whatever it tells you to, and then you're going to type in a message. So you're just going to type in a message for them so that they know what happens. And then in your controller, you're just going to have to do the valid annotation here for the user. And then you're also going to have to add the errors object. So everything that you did for your coding events here, so the valid, the errors, go ahead and look at your event model and start looking at these as a guide to help you. Again, I think this one's kind of straightforward as long as you don't have any technical difficulties. But you're just going to do these 5 things there. And then you need to make sure that it renders right and that the errors work properly. And then, yeah, that's the @valid. And you need to do the has errors. If it has errors, you want to send them right back to the same form. It does talk about validating passwords. If you don't get to this, that's probably okay. But you know how you returned an error message here saying that passwords do not match? There are different ways to handle this now that you're going to have an errors object up here. So make sure that get your errors object to work first, independently of this first, and then see if you can pull those two together. So the good news, if it was code-based that wasn't working last time, if you switch to this starter, this sign up part 2, that I didn't touch this at all. You can see that there's no green or red stuff over here. I did not touch any of this stuff. And all I did was I hit run. And the 2 things that should be working is the user/add should be here. And it should not really work because that's servers, or that's client side. And then select your spa. Like this should work as with the current code. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel there. All you're doing is you're adding the validation stuff and making sure that when you add the validation stuff, it actually validates it. Right. I saved this for last so that if you guys want to see it, I'm not actually going to do too much with it. But I do want to talk about kind of something to look at for next time. So nothing to do with this. It has everything to do with SQL. So yeah, and somebody did. I already have my stuff there, so I don't know. I don't know how to GitHub. That's what it is. GitHub sync fork. I don't know if this that's what was shared. I don't know if yeah, it's not a very good example, but that's how you get to it. That they're talking about GitHub sync fork. Again, my go-to is delete my thing and refork it with that checkbox unchecked. Let's talk about next time. So first of all, the book is in a different spot. So I'm going to hit this jump to today, which today is I don't even know why it jumped there. When I don't have full screen, it does work. So May 13th is today. So you should have read this model validation enums. But this reading for next time, and it's actually the next 2 times. If you see, these are SQL is pronounced SQL. So if I click on this class 13, this is good and bad. It says, please read the following chapter from this. So when you click on this, it should open up and it should look a little different. But this is the right one. After you finish reading, answer the concept questions and then do the stuff like normal. Whenever I went through this, the problem is it doesn't really tell you how to get the SQL stuff on your machine. If you go back to contents, and then go to this appendices, it does say install MySQL right here. So that's one way to get to it. I don't always like how things are outdated. So what I would do, you just Google install MySQL. It'll give you to the installer here. Now, of course, I am on a Windows device. If you do Mac, you might type that up. There are 2 MySQL versions that are supported right now, version 5 and version 8. You just go ahead and select the version 8. And then the other thing, and it does tell you this in the directions, there's a web version and not a web version. And if you look, this is only like 2 megabytes, and this is like almost 300 megabytes. This is the one you want. If you download and install this, it will install both the MySQL server, which is a program that needs to run, but it'll also install the MySQL workbench, which is the GUI, the graphical user interface that you interact with to access everything. So you want the bigger one, you download, you just keep hitting next. The only thing that is very important is once you create a password for the root user, you cannot change it. Now, this is a development environment, so anytime it says, hey, what type of thing are you doing, always choose developer, because remember, we are all software developers right now. So we are going to choose the developer route. It'll install everything you need, and then you just need to change a password that you're not going to forget. Now, this is to set up the server. I can create 10 different databases on top of this with all 10 of them having different passwords. So it's once you install the server to create a new database, you can do whatever you want to. So if you forget your database password, that's whatever. But this root password, if you forget this, you have to uninstall MySQL and reinstall it to then set up the password again. And if you do that later in the chapter, like if you do that in 3 weeks, or if you do that, during your project, that you're going to lose all the information that are in your databases. So you don't want to do that. It's easy to delete a database. It's not easy, relatively easy to redo MySQL. So yeah, definitely access it through Canvas. I don't like Canvas on my end because I never go to it, but I'm actually showing it to you right now because it is that important that that's how you get to it. So go ahead and hit that. The other thing I want to say, so again, to install MySQL, you can click on whatever it tells you to here. I think it says right here on this page, and I think it sent me to the same page, but I always Google this and go through the actions. You can Google these actions, right? What it does send you to, so this is the thing I don't like. It talks about what MySQL is. It talks about all these different things here, which is fine. That's great for you to start off with. And then it'll say, hey, here's some things you can do. Okay, this is fine. Well, it gives you code. But at this point, it doesn't tell you where to put that in at. Like, you don't know how to get into your SQL stuff yet. It is not until you actually get to the exercises. So this exercise part 1 is actually telling you how to open up a connection and how to get into your stuff. So if you are the type of person that wants to try along with the stuff, just know that they won't actually tell you how to set up a database until down here. So if you're one that likes to ingest information first and then actual hands-on, this is perfect for you. Just know that 1.2 and 1.3 are talking about information and you're not actually doing anything. You're just reading to get conceptually what's going on. And then 1.4 is hands-on. And then 1.5 is the studio that you guys will do on Thursday. My suggestion is to mess with this, break it, do anything you want to it, and then post everything in either the homework help or the lecture questions for me to answer on Thursday. So please go through this. It's perfectly fine if you mess it up. You do not have to be perfect at this by next time, but you do need it installed. If you have a problem with the installation part, you need to reach out sooner than later. So, okay, great question. I'm glad somebody asked it because I forgot about it. When you go and you type in, hey, how do I install MySQL, right? And you go to this thing and you're like, okay, this is the one I want. I'm going to hit download. It says right here, log in or sign up for a free account for an Oracle Web account. If you want to sign up and log in, you can. Just use your personal email. There's not much that they need there. On the other hand, you can say no thanks, just start my download. Either way works. I can't even tell you which one's better. I mean, if you're going to deal with this stuff, you might as well create. I think you can sign up using like Google and stuff, maybe. No. Oh, maybe not. If it was an easy Google button, then I'd say just go ahead and do it. But this will make you sign in, and I don't even know what mine is. Oh, there it's saved for me. So, yes, download everything. If it asked you anything about being a developer, definitely check that one. But other than that, I think I just clicked all the next buttons. And then at the end, it'll say set up your root password. Make sure that you do not forget it. I'll be very honest with you guys not storing any sensitive data in here. You can just set the root password as root. I mean, it does not matter what the password is. You just need to make sure that you remember it. That's all that matters. Actually, as a recommendation, because we are going to end very, very shortly, I would suggest at least downloading the SQL stuff sometime tonight before you guys get off. To be honest, I won't be here for part of the studio, but I'll be around and I'll be online, and then I'll be on later tonight. So at the end of studio, I'll be online to answer any questions if you run into it. But yeah, just ask me questions as you go through. I don't see anything coming through. I'm going to stop the recording.